Earlier this week, there was a report out of Washington, D.C. saying that the United States was willing to accept a low level of Iran nuclear enrichment. This was a problem for Israel, but the White House quickly corrected itself. What is the truth?
Meanwhile, international media outlets are perpetuating Hamas lies about IDF activity at the aid distribution points in Gaza. Coming up next.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm fine, or as they say, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? I think what we have to do is now talk about the clock ticking before Israel has to act on the Iranian nuclear facilities.
It became a lot more complicated this week. There was a lot of news out of Washington, some of it correct, some of it incorrect, some of it we don't know, about the Washington, America, Trump's negotiations with the Iranians. There was a story at the beginning of the week that said that Trump had agreed to low-level enrichment in Iran as part of a deal with the Ayatollahs. And that would have been, if true, would have been just a redress of the deal Obama signed, which of course Trump pulled out of because that was Israel's main. We had many complaints about the Obama deal, but the major complaint was that it allowed them to continue enriching uranium. And what's the trouble with enriching uranium? You use the same technology to enrich to low level for so-called peaceful purposes, and you spin them around those centrifuges a bit longer and you get to weapons grade. And by leaving them that capacity, basically, they agree voluntarily to put their military nuclear program in the freezer, but they can take it however they want. But as you and me know, that report, which was published, I think, on Axios, in the end was denied by the president himself, correct?
That's correct. But in the words of Abe Greenwald on the Commentary Magazine podcast, I'm plugging it, as my brother tends to plug our podcast on his dime. In the words of Abe Greenwald, it's worse than that. It's worse than that because according to reports from the International Atomic Agency, Energy Agency, Iran already has enough enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs. So it's not just that we're talking about some hypothetical and it will happen. It's really, I know we've been saying this for years, any day now, any minute now, but apparently it really is any minute now. And as we've said before, it's the time to act is when Iran is vulnerable. And Iran is vulnerable because not only did Israel take out its air defenses in October, but its economy is terrible. And unlike when Biden was president and there was lots of money flowing into its coffers, its economy is tanking and its air defenses are weakened. So now is the time. But it is also true that President Trump said so right out to a group of reporters that he had asked Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, not to make any military moves on Iran at this moment. Now we'll see. Are we getting closer? The threats out of Washington, out of the administration, are resuming. We saw that Caroline Levitt said so in her briefing to reporters. So we'll see.
So I would just add another. I agree with you 100% when you say that Iran is mainly in its most vulnerable position that it has been for the last 30, 40 years since the Islamist revolution of 1979. That is correct. And I would add one other reason. You talked about the economy. You talked about Israel destroying their air defenses and their radar and their military vulnerable. Another important factor in their increased vulnerability is their proxy armies. They built these huge proxy armies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime in Syria, which was beholden to them, Hamas in Gaza and so forth. Why did they build this huge, let's say, proxy army of Hezbollah in Lebanon? Why did they put hundreds of millions of dollars in investing in rockets? It was just like the Soviet Union building missiles in Cuba. They wanted to be able to deter Israel by building a formidable force close to us, a force that would be on our border, a force that could theoretically be used against us when Iran thought it was the right time. That's now all been dismantled. It's not totally gone maybe, but it's nowhere near the formidable force it was. And so for all those reasons, this really is a time that if one in Israel wanted to take out the Iranian nuclear program, it is the opportune moment to do so. Having said that, and you've put the finger right on the right point, I think, here, if the president has publicly asked Israel not to do it at this moment, can we really go against the wishes of the United States of America, especially against this president who's by all accounts, a very pro-Israel president? And I think that's the dilemma that Israel faces. Much will depend what sort of deal is being negotiated, what is on the table. The president said publicly this business about enrichment is not true. This business about allowing them low-level enrichment is not true. I'm sure that eased a lot of concerns that there were in Israel. But at the same time, there's talk. I'm not saying it's true. There's talk that the Americans are going for some sort of temporary deal, a deal which doesn't give a full solution, but gives some sort of temporary solution, a timeout, and that will allow the Iranians temporarily to continue low-level enrichment. That can't make any people happy in Israel, especially if it ties our hands to use the Israeli military.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because Mark Levin, this week on his show Life, Liberty, and Levin, he gave a monologue that was about Iran attacking the elements in the Trump administration, the isolationist elements within the Trump administration. And he reminded us that there were just those same isolationists before Pearl Harbor was attacked. And this idea that somehow you wait and somehow other people are dragging you into wars that are unnecessary, it's a lie. Israel isn't dragging America into any wars. By the way, Trump did say that. He'd said that a while back. Nobody's dragging me into anything. The thing is that this is a powerful part of the Trump administration. There's another part that has a whole different view of it. And so there is a fight going on inside there. And I'm praying that what I would call the good guys win in that argument, because if they think this doesn't affect them, they're crazy. Okay, because Iran also has ballistic missiles with the long-range ballistic missiles that could reach the United States. I don't know what they're thinking and why they think this is Israel's problem. And I am also very annoyed, may I say, with the Abraham Accords countries and Saudi Arabia, all of which are anti-Iran. Part of the reason for the Abraham Accords in the first place was an axis to prevent Iran from, not just from going nuclear, but from being the hegemon in the region. And suddenly, and they need Israel to beat Hamas, Hezbollah, all of those Iranian proxies. But in public, all they do is say, no, we need a Palestinian state and we need, and don't attack Iran. And it really is pissing me off.
So there's always been this dissonance between their public messages and what they say when the doors are closed and they're meeting with American officials or Israeli officials. If you ask these countries privately, if the Iranians don't, of course they prefer a deal. And like Trump says he prefers a deal. But if those countries know that Iran's about to proliferate and there isn't a diplomatic option, they might not shout it from the rooftops, but I'm not sure they're against a military strike. I remember how in the first decade, during the Obama years, when Netanyahu went to speak at the Congress against the deal, he got messages from certain Arab countries in the area saying, you're not just speaking for Israel, you're speaking against us. Yes, they were against the bad deal at the time. Now, Trump says, and I'm going to be difficult with you, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Trump says we don't have to worry because he won't agree to any enrichment. Do you trust him, Ruthie?
Listen, if I trust him to say that. What I don't trust him about is that sentence about a good deal. There is no such thing as a good deal. And when those Abraham Accords countries before, which you mentioned, when Netanyahu spoke before the Congress against Obama's deal, it wasn't that no deal is a good deal. It's not just Obama's deal. No, I say dictate, don't deal with regimes like that. Oh, I think Trump is wrong to think there is such thing as a good deal. He can say, okay, you guys, either we watch you blow up your own facilities and we monitor it, or we blow them up. Okay, no, this is not a deal. This is the greatest superpower in the world dictating to a crappy little regime of ayatollahs, of Islamists. I'm sorry that this is not the way. And this is my problem in general. All of these negotiations with malign actors, you cannot negotiate with them. So when you say that, do I trust Trump? I don't trust the isolationists in his administration at all. I trust him to have good gut instincts, but every time the word deal and good are put together, it makes me nervous, including if Netanyahu says it.
So I would say the following. The downside of what's going on now is that the president asked Israel not to act militarily. Israel has to take that request very, very, very seriously. You must, in your calculations, put that at a very high level. It's not necessarily the be-all and end-all, but it has to be a crucial input into your decision-making process. The American president asked you, at the moment, it's not the right time to attack. So what can happen? First of all, we heard the Iranian supreme leader just this morning. I heard him on the radio, translated into English, of course. I don't speak Farsi. But he was saying we can never, ever give up on enrichment. Now, if President Trump is serious about what he said, that means there's not going to be a deal. And that means that he said one way or another, that means he goes to his second, less preferred option, which is a military strike. Either he gives Israel a green light and helps us, or it's a combined U.S.-Israeli military strike. And that's a lot of people in Israel, including people who are not just the government, outside the government. Some of the opposition people have said we've got to take out the Iranian. It's not necessarily an issue that divides the Israeli body politic. So far, at least, it hasn't. So that's one option, which is good. But if he gets a deal that does, and I agree, the probability is very low considering everything the Iranians said, but if he gets a deal which does deal with enrichment, a deal that looks like the Libyan deal that was signed when Gaddafi was still in power, that actually does dismantle the program. And how did Trump say? He said, a deal that blows up, we can blow up these installations one way or another. If they peacefully blow them up, we'll be happy to. I agree with you that the probability is very low, but if that happens, I don't think we should be complaining either.
That's putting it mildly. The probability is low. They're not doing it. They won't do it. It's just as Hamas is not releasing hostages. Hamas has to be defeated, has to be forced to release them, or they have to be freed. Hamas is not doing anything of its own free will in this respect. Neither did Hezbollah, and neither will Iran, and the Houthis also from Yemen. And while we're having this discussion, every day the Houthis are firing rockets. And by the way, a rocket was, missiles, I should say. Rockets is less, these are Houthi missiles. And then while the Houthis were firing on Israel yesterday, Syria woke up. We had rockets from Al-Qaeda, ISIS type forces in Syria. So it's like, hey, now when you're saying, I don't know what's going to happen, and you're right that it's clear Netanyahu is waiting for a green light from President Trump. And it's possible, between you and me and anybody else who's listening, it's possible that Netanyahu likes being held back. Because one thing we know about Netanyahu, aside from these false accusations that he's some kind of warmonger, he actually has always been extremely cautious. In my opinion, too cautious, including in this war in Gaza.
I just add, there's a biography written by a left-wing journalist who works for Arts of Netanyahu that's been published in English, and he's a critic of Netanyahu, and he says, yes, Netanyahu is has historically been very, very cautious in the way he used military force.
Right. So what I'm saying is it's possible that Netanyahu likes having Trump, likes saying, hold me back, because he's not crazy about the idea of doing this for Israel, doing it by ourselves or whatever, for whatever reason. But I'm not saying he doesn't have to listen to what the United States says. But my question is, okay, at what point do you say, well, look, this is a threat. It's a threat to the world, but it's a really an existential threat to the state of Israel. And at what point do you say, I'm sorry, President Trump, I have to override you because my country is at stake. Now, what I'm hoping, by the way, another possibility that we didn't bring up right now, is that behind the scenes, Netanyahu and Trump, or the administrations, people on both sides, are actually in cahoots with this good cop, bad cop, that they're in lockstep about how they're portraying all of this, that the United States is saying, wait, give us, and Israel is saying, we can't wait. It's possible that this is on purpose, and that all that baloney rift that everyone was talking about, again, the media, rift, and it's also from Axios, oh, there's a big rift. It's possible that that's on purpose to maybe put Iran to sleep to some extent, so that they're thinking that they're managing to pull the wool over Trump's eyes, and in fact, it's the other way around. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part.
You said before there are people in the administration who are more isolationists and people who are more in the Ronald Reagan sort of American global leadership type Republicans. And I'd say the following. It's clear that there's one man who'll make the decision, and that's the president himself. It's his call. And that's only right because he's, the highest elected official. He's the chief executive. He's the commander-in-chief. But I think also it's quite possible that Trump's position on this is moving. I mean, if he reaches a decision that the Iranians are just not negotiating seriously, right? After all that he has said, right? He's almost committed to act, and maybe to do that in cahoots with Israel is the best way for him to do that. We have to see how this plays out. If Netanyahu says, well, let's let him negotiate, even if Netanyahu agrees with you that negotiations go nowhere, if he wants American support for an attack, he needs the process to play out. And I think that's probably part of his strategy. That's probably part of his thinking.
Right. But I'm saying something beyond that. Not that even if negotiations go nowhere, I don't want them to go somewhere. I think there shouldn't be negotiations.
Well, there already are.
Negotiation presupposes that you have two sides who are aiming.
But that's a train, Ruthie, that's left the station. The Americans are negotiating.
Okay. But what I'm saying is, I am going to repeatedly say this. I'm against it. Give it a chance, not a chance. The worst thing could happen is that Iran agrees to some phony deal. And it is phony because Iran is not going to uphold any deal, whatever the hell the deal is. So President Trump takes things personally. And I think that people in his inner circle should be translating from Farsi all the massive insults that have been coming out of Iran, out of the regime, from the Ayatollah, from the president of Iran, making fun of Trump, saying he's a liar. I think Trump needs to hear that because, one thing we know is that he takes things personally, and he does not take kindly to, crappy little despots daring to cross him. So that's my hope, because now I don't know whether we're going to attack those nuclear facilities or not. And we still have to win in Gaza, which brings us to Gaza, by the way. I think we really have to talk about that now.
Another thing that came out of the White House this week, which is hardly routine, is we heard criticism from the White House spokeswoman, I should say, I presume. She said very clearly, she criticized media outlets, naming some of them specifically for parroting Hamas propaganda. And it was specifically about this story in Gaza that 20, 30 people were killed by so-called Israeli fire outside the new humanitarian food distribution centers, the ones that are supported by the United States and Israel, the ones that are not controlled by Hamas. And this story that was put out by Hamas in Gaza, that was picked up and echoed and parroted by media, for the White House to come out and criticize this, we've been saying this show all along, since we started this show over a year ago. We've been saying that, Hamas is lies. You can't take the statistics put out by the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. If you believe them, everyone who's been killed in Gaza is women and children, and Israel only hurts innocent civilians, and we do so deliberately, and we do so like all this war crime genocide narrative. And for the White House to come up and to specifically criticize international media, including American media, I should say, for parroting these sort of positions without checking their facts first, I thought was actually very, very, very interesting, and it broke a precedent.
Oh, and it's not just that. Okay, she attacked the BBC for saying, for just spreading the propaganda. And Mike Huckabe, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, actually came out with a long official statement attacking several media outlets, the New York Times, AP, the BBC. He left out several as well, like Sky News. He not only said that they're buying into Hamas's lies about Israeli soldiers firing on the Gazans getting their food packages. It was actually any firing that was going on was from Hamas. But he blames the media for the huge explosion of anti-Semitism and made a direct connection between those media lies and the attack in Boulder, Colorado, where this Islamist threw Molotov cocktails on a peaceful march on behalf of the hostages, elderly people, one a Holocaust survivor who was severely burned, and 3 weeks prior to that, the gunning down of 2 Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, D.C. by a Marxist, not an illegal migrant, but an American citizen who was a Marxist. Again, the marriage of the Red-Green Alliance and Mike Huckabe, good for him, called it out and made a direct connection between those things. Now, it's also important, we have to say, because I have to tell you, whenever I'm interviewed by foreign media outlets, the first thing they say is, well, how can we believe you? You won't let journalists in there. And how come we? I'm thinking, we won't let journalists in there, and you're saying, how can we? You're the ones showing that footage all the time. So how do you get that footage? And it's also very interesting how all the glossy articles of so-called starving Gazans on piles of rubble, interesting, these clear photographs on iPhones. Interesting. I wonder where they're charging their iPhones and their tablets, if they're all living under rubble. There is something really appalling. And by the way, when journalists were allowed in Gaza, many times in the past they have been, you think that the coverage is any different, but this brings me to...
Can I just take it? Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to address some of the issues that you spoke about. And of course...
Okay.
I think the Western media's parroting of Hamas's lines is a problem. I do believe there's a connection, because Hamas's lines are that Israel are barbarians and they're committing genocide and they're terrible people, and that obviously fits a narrative that can inspire extremists. Let's be clear about that. You can't say I just hate Israelis and then wonder why some Jews in Colorado are being targeted, right? It's clear that it's all interrelated, and I'd remind the viewers of our podcast, you only have to read the Hamas Charter to know that Hamas at its core is not just anti-Israel, it's a fundamentally anti-Semitic organization. Hamas says atrocious things, right? Jews responsible for the world wars, Jews corrupting. It's like openly an anti-Semitic document. And so to say that Hamas is not connected to anti-Semitism, it's just not true. Hamas is an anti-Semitic organization, and it puts out anti-Semitic material. And
all radical Islamists are anti-Semites, hate Jews, and they make no bones about it.
Correct. And so therefore, I think it's incumbent upon everyone, when Hamas puts something out of Gaza, just some information, it has to be, logic would make it incumbent upon a press agency, can we verify this before running with it? And of course, unfortunately, That's not done. Of course, they rely on their local producers and
Stringers
in Gaza. But here there's a question that's never asked correctly, which is Hamas has been running Gaza for over a decade, I think a decade and a half, and even more.
2 decades.
They came to power in 2007, and so it's close to 2 decades.
Well,
So 2
Israel
decades.
left Gaza in 2005. Then
Yes.
there was an election in 2006.
And Hamas took over in 2007. And Hamas is an authoritarian regime. It's also got a very radical ideology. You could even say it has totalitarian elements because it's totally encompassing, right? All the civilians who are working for press agencies, do you think they could have their jobs if Hamas didn't want them to have those jobs? In other words, they live in a coercive society. I would argue, let's say, a journalist from the New York Times who has a Chinese stringer, someone who helps him translate, he knows that Chinese person, yes, is limited because he lives in an authoritarian society, what he can and what he can't do, right? It's the same if you've got Western journalists in other authoritarian countries across the planet. They know that the local staff have limitations on what they can do. But somehow, in Gaza, local press people can put out whatever they want, or they're seen as Western-like journalists, but they're limited. Why is it that, I listen to these stringers on the different networks, on BBC, on NPR. I've never heard criticism of Hamas. It's always Israel's fault. And is this accidental? What's going on here?
Of course
finally,
it's not accidental.
Finally, one last point, and then I'll let you say what you wanted to say before, and I rudely cut you off.
You did.
I want to say the following. This specific story from earlier this week about Israel shooting at people outside the aid centers. Israel wants these aid centers to work. That's the bottom line. We've invested a lot together with the Americans in this whole new progress to build a system to give out humanitarian aid, which Hamas can't control and therefore can't use it to maintain its power in Gaza, to undermine Hamas's civil control of the Gaza population by removing them, for they're not handing out the aid through these organizations that they control directly or indirectly. Who has an interest in upsetting this? Who has an interest in this new project not working? It's clear.
Hamas.
But Israel is the one shooting to preventing outside these stations. It's clear that Hamas has an interest, and thank goodness we got the video to show it. Yes, but even a bit of common sense. Yes, would Israel have an interest in this new project failing? The answer is clearly no. But of course, common sense falls aside.
It's not just that. It's that Israel. Why is the instinct of, let's say, you talk about these bleeding heart liberal media outlets.
Not
okay?
my term. Yours.
My term.
Yes.
You don't have to parrot my terms. Bleeding hearts. They care about the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are getting food. They're getting food not through the terrorists who are terrorizing them as well.
Yeah.
These same outlets automatically see Israel, a westernized democracy, also full of liberals and a liberal media. Why is the instinct to believe a bloodthirsty terrorist organization over Israel? Why would that be your first thought? And I was thinking about Piers Morgan, for example, who has been extremely critical of Israel, to put it mildly, on his broadcast. And I was thinking like this: why does he always assume that the anti-Israel forces are right? And in everything else he talks about, he doesn't have that same double standard. So, for example, he's very obsessed with Meghan Markle and her treatment of the royal family. And she claimed the royal family was racist, and they say they're. He doesn't believe her. He does believe the royal family. And I'm thinking he won't even give Israel the benefit of the doubt when faced with these liars, killers, rapists. What is that? Well, I'm not going to accuse Piers Morgan of anti-Semitism because, I don't like to bandy around terms. For example, rape, it has no meaning. If everything is rape, nothing is rape. So I'm careful about that. But there is some screw loose with people who would prefer to believe bands of terrorists over rational people, even if they don't like Prime Minister Netanyahu or they don't like his policies. Don't you see a difference between the Sinwar brothers, thank God they're dead, and Prime Minister Netanyahu or the head of the army. It makes no sense, which is one of the reasons that the word anti-Semitism arises, because you say when there is no logic to your hating somebody for no reason, that's one of the answers. But I just would like to add one thing, and then I'll return the floor to you. And that is the ex-Israeli prime ministers, generals, and members of the left-wing media in Israel who are also perpetuating the lie of genocide in Gaza. These are ex-generals who themselves fought wars. They know it's not true. They are feeding this disgusting lie. They are members of the protest movement, but they have gone so far. They're going around the world and being interviewed, like former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, not to mention former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, going around and spreading what they are lies. It isn't true. And by the way, we're pretty crappy at genocide if the population has grown since October 7th, 2023, and not been completely decimated.
So first of all, I agree with that. I think the comments of those former Israeli officials and Israeli leaders, let's be frank, have hurt us internationally. I hear the way they've been echoed in the international media. I would also argue, though, there have been comments by certain Israeli right-wing leaders that were used to say that Israel really wants to commit genocide, and look at the way they're speaking. And so I would also criticize those comments. I think those sort of extremes on both sides, most of Israel isn't there, right? Most of Israel is not on the far extreme left or on the far extreme right. Most Israelis are in a healthy, center left or center right position. That's what I believe. So I think we can also blame some of the statements that have come out of the far right, which have played into this genocidal narrative, which is, of course, totally false. It's fake news. On the other issue, which you raised about, what's going on with Gaza and the press, and you used Piers Morgan as an example. I remember in the first few weeks, maybe months of the war, he was very supportive. And there's been a deterioration in his position. And this is what a lot of people will tell you overseas. They'll say, well, Israel is right to respond, but we're going over the top and we're responding and we're being too harsh and so forth. That's the narrative. And they see all this stuff on their television screens and on their telephones, and they see the video coming in and so forth. And so there's been this slow but steady erosion in support for Israel. And I admit some of the pictures coming out of Gaza are very, very difficult. But I'll say something that I believe to be true. Let's say to win this war, Israel gets bad publicity abroad, okay? And let's say we lose Piers Morgan, who used to be more friendly. I would argue, as an Israeli, okay, we're fighting this war. This war is causing great difficulty in Israel. We've got the hostages and their families. We've got soldiers getting killed in Gaza who are fighting, right? We're on the incoming, as you said before, we're on the incoming receiving end of rockets from Syria and rockets from Yemen, from our Houthi friends, yes. Tourism is down, the economy is suffering. All these bad things are happening because we have to organize ourselves and we have to win this war, and that has to be the priority, yes? Win the war, get the hostages back, have a new reality in Gaza where Hamas no longer runs the show. That has to be achieved. If having a certain level of bad public relations abroad is part of the price we have to pay to win the war, I'm willing to pay the price.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. We have to win the war. And I think one thing that Israeli history, if not Jewish history, but Israeli history for sure has shown is that when Israel is victorious, the levels of anti-Semitism go down, or at least open expressions of it. There is something about this, about defeat that causes, I think that's why there was such an explosion on October 7th. Instead of sympathy for Israelis and Jews, hatred went up. And that's another reason why it's imperative for us to emerge victorious.
And I'll finish, because we've come to the end of our time, I'll finish with an old sentence that needs to be repeated. I think it was Golda Meir who first said it. Golda Meir, Israel's first female prime minister. She was prime minister, I think, from 69 to 74, 1969 to 1974. She said, better a bad editorial than a positive eulogy.
Excellent.
See you next week, Ruthie.